Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carl Fippinger, Vice President, Fire and Disaster Mitigation at the International Code Council. I'd like to welcome you to Getting the Most Out of FEMA's $1 billion FY2021 BRIC program webinar. Today will be a discussion of grant-funded code activities for building and fire prevention departments. We're also recording this webinar and we'll be answering questions live here today with our panel of experts. So thank you again for attending, and I'm going to go through just a couple of quick introductory comments here, and then I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel and pass it over to our first speaker. So today's program is going to consist of a few different pieces. The first, we're going to introduce you a little bit to the background on the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program that FEMA has, how it's administered, what's eligible, what conditions apply. We'll talk a little bit about how fiscal year 2020 went in its first year and some of the changes and things that we have to look forward to for fiscal year 2021, which the application process is currently open and underway. So after that, we'll talk a little bit about state experience with FEMA BRIC and a bit of a success story that we'd like to highlight between two state agencies in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Then we'll finish our presentations with how building code effectiveness grading schedule, or BSEGS ratings, impact BRIC, as we know that's a hot topic out there with all of our members and stakeholders. So to give you just a quick overview in terms of takeaways, in FY 2020, BRIC was a $500 million grant program, as you can see on the screen. That has increased well above that in FY 21, where the president announced at his hurricane briefing this year that FEMA was going to be administering BRIC as a $1 billion grant program this year. So we're very excited about that. That brings with it a lot of opportunities for building departments, code enforcement departments, including fire departments. And what we want to do is spend a little time talking to you today on how to and encourage you to how to take advantage of adopting, implementing, training, and getting certified and accredited in all things building codes, as well as maybe addressing some of those hardware and software needs to move you into more into the digital environment. So with that, what I'd like to be able to do is I'll go to our next slide here and introduce our panel. So we're glad to have back with us again today for the second year in a row. We're going to make this an annual thing. Our good friend Camille Crane, who is the BRIC section chief at FEMA. She's got a big program to administer there and lots to talk to you about today. So she'll be kicking us off here momentarily. We're also glad to have Debbie Messmer with us from my home state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, where she's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. Also within state government here in the Commonwealth is Jeff Brown. He's Director of State Building Codes Office for the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as DHCD. And then Dale Tomier, our good friend as well, who is Manager Community Hazard Mitigation at ISO Verisk, and he'll be talking to us about BSEGS today. So that's our lineup. We've got some presentations to be able to share with you, and then we're going to try to leave a little bit of time at the end to be able to do some panel discussion and maybe some live discussion on some of the questions that have come in. But also, please, I point you to the Q&A function in WebEx here, which is our platform. Please feel free to send in your questions as we go. I know that I will and the other presenters will, while we're kind of not on stage here. We'll be answering those questions as we can on a rolling basis during this today. So for a little bit of context, I wanted to share an interesting fact with you. So according to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, only about a third of U.S. communities that face damaging winds, hurricane, tornado, seismic, or flood hazards have adopted hazard-resistant codes. So I think that sets the stage today for a good discussion of, if you haven't adopted the latest codes, how you can leverage BRIC and possibly other grant programs to be able to do that. But we're gonna focus on BRIC here today and talk a little bit about building code activities and things that are eligible there, as well as some of the other things that BRIC addresses. It's a big program, and with that, what I'd like to do is ask the rest of our panelists to maybe take a quick break here. We'll mute our microphones, turn our cameras off, and we're going to give the stage to Camille Crane, who again is the BRIC section chief at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And here is your first slide, Camille.
Thanks so much, Carl. And let me start with thanking ICC for hosting us again this year and helping us be, you're just a great champion for the BRIC program, and I really appreciate it. And I'm glad this year to also share the stage with some state counterparts and Dale as well. So let's go right to our next slide because we have a bunch of folks and a bunch of information to present. And so I want to make sure we get through all of it and get time for some of your key questions. I always like to start with, when I talk about BRIC, is our foundational guiding principles. So if you don't know about the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, or BRIC grant program, we came out of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. And we spent a while putting the program together, and that was intentional. We wanted to really hear what people wanted. We did a large stakeholder engagement to build the program, and we set forth starting with 6 guiding principles. So these are foundational principles that we designed our program on. We wanted to support communities' capacity and capability building. We see building codes as part of that. We wanted to encourage and enable innovation, promote partnerships. So I'm really glad to see 2 state agencies going to be talking about their partnering today. Enabling large infrastructure projects. We wanted to maintain flexibility because we're very serious about it being a program that continually improves. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about differences from our FY20 to 21 program. And then we wanted to provide consistency. Going to the next slide. Every year in our NOFO, we put what our priorities for funding are for that year. So FY21 NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, came out in August. As Carl said, we just opened our application period a few days ago. And so we have our 4 priorities from last year, plus we've added 2 new this year. So our priorities are mitigating the risk to public infrastructure, incentivizing resilient investment in disadvantaged communities as referenced in Executive Order 14008. That's one of our new ones. Mitigating the risk to 1 or more community lifelines, incorporating nature-based solutions, enhancing climate resilience and adaptation. That's our second new one. And incentivizing the adoption and enforcement of the latest editions of building codes. And building code shows up in a few different ways in the program, and I'm going to talk to you about that today. We also, of course, encourage mitigation projects that meet multiple priorities. Next slide. So one of the things that makes BRIC different is the way we're funded. Our funding comes from disaster activity. So we basically, every time a disaster happens, 180 days later, 6% estimate is taken of certain sections and put into that BRIC piggy bank you see on the right. And then once a year, we're able to scoop money out of that piggy bank and we put it into a program. So as Carl mentioned, the president, when he came to FEMA headquarters for his hurricane briefing, announced that we were going to have $1 billion available for our FY20 program. And that breaks into 3 different components. So first, our state and territories. So 50 states, 5 territories in the District of Columbia are all eligible for $1 million apiece. We call that their allocation. So they all have $1 million to spend on mitigation projects, management cost, and what we're going to call community capacity and capability building project types. Then federally recognized tribes, because they don't get an allocation, we have set aside $25 million for those federally recognized tribes that want to apply directly to FEMA. Then the balance of the $1 billion, so that's estimated to be around $919 million if we spend all the allocation funding in the tribal set aside, goes into a national competition for mitigation projects. Next slide. So kind of giving you, if you were following about the BRIC program last year, giving you a kind of a high level look at what is different. So you heard Carl already mention that the funding doubled. So we went from $500 million last year to $1 billion available this year. With our state and territories allocations, we've increased that by $400,000. So last year, the state and territory allocation was $600,000. We heard that states and territories really cared about building capacity and capability and needed some more funding to do that. So we increased that to $1 million per applicant. And then likewise, we took the tribal set aside. Last year we had 20 million. We bumped that by 5 million up to 25 million. We have a piece of our program called non-financial direct technical assistance. We know for some of our lower capacity communities, the bar is too high right now to write an application, but they definitely have needs. But they just need some hands-on technical assistance to build their capacity and capability. So we've doubled the number of communities we're going to be able to do that with this year, and we've still 20, and we've streamlined the process to do that, where they can write just a letter of interest and send it directly to a FEMA inbox. Our competition criteria has morphed as well. We have added equity considerations across multiple of our competition criteria. We have gone from a 200 points to a 230 point system. We've tiered the building code points, and I'm going to show that a little bit later. And we've increased the points for the building code effectiveness grading schedule, also known as BSEGs. We also have changed the name of small and impoverished communities to economically disadvantaged rural communities. Those are sub-applicants that are populations of 3,000 or less that are economically disadvantaged. They are eligible to apply for a 90% cost share instead of the standard 75%. Next slide. So talking about these capacity and capability building project types, they are limited to the allocation and the tribal set aside. So up to $1 million per state can apply to these, or for these type of projects, and tribes can apply for up to $1 million. Federally recognized tribes, I should say, can apply for up to $1 million as well as part of the tribal set aside. So the national competition does not have these project types, but this is where you're going to see building code activity, as well as we fund partnerships, we fund project scoping or seed money to figure out what kind of mitigation project you might need to do and apply later for that. And then also mitigation planning, which is the creation, the update, or mitigation planning related activities. Building codes, as we go to the next slide, what can we fund under building code activity? So we basically bucket it into 3 sections, and I've got a link at the end of this presentation. I would ask anyone who's really interested in learning more, kind of diving deep into what kind of building code activity you can apply for. We've developed what's called a program support material. So it's think about a 5-page or so handout that goes more in depth about what you can exactly apply for. But it kind of buckets into 3 different sections. So one is we can fund the adoption or evaluating the adoption and or implementation of codes that reduce risk. The second is we can enhance existing adopted codes to incorporate more current requirements or higher standards. And then last, we can develop professional workforce capabilities through technical assistance and training. And I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation, I've got a list of things that came in the FY20. Carl said we show you a little bit about how FY20 came out. I've got a list of sub-applications we received that were for building code activities across these 3 different buckets, and I'm going to show you what those were. As we go to the next slide. So I talked about building code shows up 3 main different ways in the BRIC program. The first is that we can actually fund building code activity, and that was innovative for us. That wasn't something we'd been able to do in our previous program. The second way that building codes show up is in the fact that any mitigation project that we fund must be built to current code or consensus codes. And that includes if building codes are applicable to that project must be built to one of the latest 2 of those consensus codes, or in this case, building codes. The third way it comes up is in our competition criteria. So I talked about that our competition criteria, so the criteria that will be used to score for that 919 million estimated that's available is 230 points across 2 different criteria. So you've got the technical criteria that you see on the screen here, which is 8, and then you've got qualitative criteria, which I'm not going to talk to you about today because of time, but there's 6 of those. Once again, we have developed program support material, and if you're thinking about applying to the BRIC program, I would have something in the national competition, because this competition criteria is only judged for those projects that are going to the national competition, but I cannot suggest too much that I ask you to read those program support materials. They really are keys to understanding how to score points. But if you look at these 8 that are in the technical criteria, these are all binary points, so they're either all or nothing. We have one that's tiered, but other than that, they're all or nothing. They are assigned by FEMA staff. Our qualitative are done by peer review panels, and they're gradients, for example. But if you look at these 8, they speak to really the priorities of the program. So you're going to see points there if it's infrastructure, lifelines, nature-based, projects that come from small and impoverished. Some of them, the 2 that I really want to focus on are those 2 you're going to see in the red boxes. And they're not so much about the projects themselves, they're about the attributes of the people that are applying or the communities that are applying. So the first one says their applicants have mandatory tribal, territorial, statewide building code adoption requirements. So applicants are our states, territories, and tribes. These are the entities that apply directly to FEMA. They are the applicants. So to receive the 20 points, you must have adopted, the state must have mandatory statewide, I'll use that as an example, adoption of either the 2018 or the 2021 International Building Code and International Residential Code. You can also get 10 points if you have the adoption of the 2015 International Building Code and International Residential Code. With it being a transition year with the 20, because we always go by the latest 2, with the 21 code coming into effect, plus with the pandemic going on, we wanted this year to leave some points for states, territories, tribes that may still have the 2015 adopted. So 10 points for the 2015, 20 points for either the 2018 or 2021. Then the next one is about the characteristics of the sub applicant. So that usually is a local government, for example, that they have a building code effectiveness grading schedule rating of 1 to 5. That was worth 15 points last year. We bumped it up to 20 points this year because we wanted to have parity between the applicant and the sub applicant. So they're worth the same amount of points. So we're rewarding both what local governments, for example, are doing as well as state governments. And I know Dale's on with me today, and he's going to talk a lot more about BSEGs here in a few minutes. Next slide. So in our program support material, we have this map. We want to be very transparent about who will receive those 10 and 20 points for the applicant's building codes. This map is as of July 1st, 2021. So we will run this map again at the application deadline because we know statuses may change. I think we already have one change in one of the states who's adopted a code. But if you look across the states that are in red, as of July 1 had adopted the 2015. States that are in blue had adopted the 2018 or 2021. And states that are in gray have not adopted any of those 3 codes, or have not adopted both the IBC and IRC of those 3 codes, I should clarify. This map is in our program support material as well, that is available on our BRIC website. Next slide. I talked a little bit about our non-financial direct technical assistance. I always want to emphasize this because we know one of our goals this year is to really help mitigate the risk to disadvantaged populations. And a lot of those are lower capacity communities that it's hard to write for them to put in a grant application. That is what our non-financial direct technical assistance is meant to do, in this case, helping 20 communities around the nation. This could be, we've left the aperture wide open of what communities can request. It just has to be in the realm of natural hazard mitigation, and that might include building codes. Next slide. So looking through, showing you just a little bit of a capture of what we got in from 2020 as examples of projects. Now at this point, we have gotten to our pre-award, but we have not funded any projects yet. So these are from selections. But if you look at the bucket of projects that came in the first thing I talked about, which was evaluating the adoption and or implementation of codes that reduce risk, we have anywhere from local, tribal, and states, from like the Seminole tribe of Florida looking at the adoption. We have Massachusetts, the state, looking at adopting the 2021, and Connecticut looking at Hartford for code for enforcement adoption and accreditation. As you go to the next slide, you'll see more lists for the other two buckets. So looking at enhancing existing adopted codes to incorporate more current requirements or higher standards. We have everything there from states, including Indiana, Vermont, and Pennsylvania, as well as Houston in Texas. And then if you look to the third category of developing professional workforce capabilities through technical assistance and training, once again, we have Michigan and Maine, and then we have Lexington and Fayette Urban County government with the state of Kentucky, with the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and then we have Iowa too. So we have a selection of both tribal, local, and state that came in last year. This is something we would definitely like to see increase in numbers this year. So as I wind down, the next slide is a list of all those program support materials I've talked about. I can't encourage too much seeing them. So if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. That includes our BRIC website, FEMA.gov/BRIC, BRIC. But you've got there our technical criteria and our qualitative criteria. Those are what we call our keys to being successful in our competition. And then third there, you'll see the building code activities, PSM. One quick mention for the one at the end, which is our mitigation action portfolio. That was a direct request of our stakeholders to kind of say, what does a BRIC project look like? Is a living document we update every year. It is a collection of case studies, including we have building code activities in there as examples. So with that, I think the next one, Carl, is my last slide, and I am out of time, so I'm going to hand it back to you.
No, that sounds good, Camille. Well done as always, and I am always amazed at how much information you're able to take and squeeze into 15 minutes like that too. So you did a fantastic job. We thank you so much. And just as a reminder to everyone, this is kind of a rare occasion then that we get Camille for the full hour, and she's going to be on and able to answer questions in the background here. There was one that came in for you while you were presenting, and I'm sure there will probably be maybe a few more. So we encourage you to take full advantage of that, and we'll answer as many as we can get to. But at this point, what I'd like to do is transition from Camille on to Debbie Messmer and to Jeff Brown from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Debbie's going to lead off. So Debbie, again, is the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. So we're going to talk a little bit here about Virginia's experience with the program in terms of both how it was administered and also how it was received, and maybe some of the relationships that have come out of that. But Debbie, I'll turn it over to you and to Jeff, and encourage you to talk a little bit more about that, and we'll transition to Jeff once you're done with your slides.
Okay, great. Sound check, you can hear me okay?
Absolutely, yes we can.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So if you want to go to the next slide, yep. Oh, and I guess BRIC in Virginia, we can go one more slide. Okay, so I want to touch a little bit, and I know that Camille talked about it, but this was something that I think came up from my experiences last year, and it came up from a lot of the state hazard mitigation officers' experiences in doing the BRIC application. Is FEMA thinks, or I shouldn't say FEMA thinks, but FEMA has put out the NOFO, and in terms of an applicant versus, I mean, identifying an applicant and a sub-applicant, but it's really catered towards the applicant in terms of the dates and the deadlines. So they're trying really hard starting now to kind of really differentiate between the applicant and the sub-applicant, but I thought I would also take this time to do this because this was kind of a sticky point last year with us in determining when applications were due. So it's important for everyone to understand that a state can really only submit one application. And when they submit that one application, it consists of other applications, sub-applicants, or sub-applications from sub-applicants. So for example, in Virginia, as a state hazard mitigation officer, I will submit one application this year that will have multiple sub-applications from my local government, my state agencies, anyone else that potentially could be eligible. So when you're looking at your state's deadlines and their processes, you really need to look at what the sub applicant deadline is if you're submitting a sub application. So for example, in Virginia, our sub application deadline is actually November 10th of this year. So what that does is that gives us ample time to review the applications, the sub applications that have come in. So we'll have time to review them and go through our process in Virginia and then submit them as one giant application by the applicant, which is us, Virginia. Okay, next slide, please. So here's the process in Virginia, like I talked about. So the NOFO deadline, I'm sorry, it says NOFO deadline. That should say the NOFO was put out in September 30th of 2021. The deadline for the application is January 28th, 2022. But the Virginia deadline, as I stated, is November 10th, 2021. So what happens once that application is submitted to us, we go through a technical review process, which I'm pretty sure I can speak for the majority of the states here, is there's a technical review process at some point, because we want to make sure that as a sub-applicant, that your application has its best chance of being selected. So it's eligible, it has all the supporting documentation requirements that it needs. Then in Virginia, we go through a peer review process. So all of our sub-applications are reviewed by either experts in the field or experts in mitigation or experts in emergency management. So all of the sub-applications are reviewed and scored. Then after that, we rank the projects that we submit to FEMA, and then we in Virginia, in turn, submit those applications within FEMA Go ourselves. So we have a different grants portal that everyone submits their sub-applications into, and then we in Virginia, the grants administrators and my team, actually manually enter in the sub-applications into FEMA system for the sub-applicants. And then we submit our one big umbrella application that is then submitted to FEMA with the sub-applicant applications attached to it. Next slide. So our grants portal that we use is the VDEMEMgrants.com. So as I said, the sub-applications are submitted within that system. All of our peer review happens, all of our technical review happens within that grants portal. Then we in turn take the outputs from that grants portal and we go into FEMA Go system, the FEMA Grants Outcome System. We go in there and we manually enter in the supporting documentation and answer all of the questions for the sub-applicant. That way, we feel that 10 to 15 years experience of doing this before with PDM and now with BRIC, we have a pretty good understanding of what FEMA is looking for specific questions. Next slide. So these are just some of the funding opportunities that we used and had in Virginia. So we had, everyone, as all the other states did, we have a state set aside last year of $600,000, which I think Camille touched on, as did Carl, and that's been increased to $1 million. So we in Virginia are prioritizing our projects that are scoping and capacity building, and as opposed to the planning side of things. So we're trying to promote projects that are evaluating a problem, determining a solution for a potential future project that could be funded under BRIC or even under a different grant program that we might have. So in 2020, in Virginia, with our set aside money, we actually had applications that were engineering studies for stormwater and microgrids. We had an outreach and education project, and then flooding, and then of course the building codes one that Jeff will touch on as well. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at all the stuff in front of my phone, so my fingers are flying in front of it. So this year, we'll be using all of the $1 million to fund capability and capacity projects versus setting aside any funding for planning grants, because all of our planning grants will be funded using other funding streams. So this is a really good opportunity for our localities to capitalize on that full amount of money that will be available. Next slide. So let me just say a few things. Like in Virginia, you know, we work with various state agencies in the development of different projects that have come. And our time, and Jeff will touch a little bit about their application that they submitted. You know, we worked with them to try to come up with like an innovative application that that FEMA would at least start as a basis for what we want to do in Virginia. So at this time, I'll just let Jeff kind of go forward and touch on the rest of the application and other things. Thanks.
Yeah, sounds good, Debbie. And we definitely want to welcome Jeff to the conversation here. So I wanted to thank you really quick before you went away as well, because you know, you pointed out some things here that I want to make sure the audience hears, and maybe Jeff can help to reinforce a little bit too, which is the fact that, you know, Virginia has some pretty significant differences in terms of things like deadlines than the federal government does. And I know that that's something that Camille wanted to make sure that we stressed here today, is that, you know, while there are federal rules and policies around this kind of stuff, particularly to do with deadlines and other things, states also have, in many cases, like Virginia, have their own way of managing these things. So you brought that up. I wanted to stress that. The other piece I wanted to do is to just continue on that theme. You've heard Camille talk a little bit about the applicant, sub-applicant piece. Debbie, you of course touched on that, and then Jeff, you know, you are certainly part of that piece as a sub-applicant, even though you're a state agency, and I know you're gonna speak to that. But I know the thread will also continue through to Dale's presentation, where he's got a bit on applicant and sub-applicant too. So Jeff, why don't we let you go ahead and address the audience here for a minute? I know that you had some really good comments when we spoke last about just the, you know, the general relationship that has developed over the last year or so, that was not there maybe as strongly previously ahead of BRIC, and maybe some things that you hadn't thought about prior to this program being out there in terms of connections with other partners like VDEM. So maybe you can speak to your experience on that and hit a little bit on hopefully what will be an award for you here coming up at the end of November. So Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Carl, and thank you, Debbie. So yeah, I'm gonna step back and just kind of talk through how the process played out for us and how we got involved in the BRIC grant. So as most of you all know, you know, everything we do as building safety professionals, whether you're a local, state, national level, you know, we're all working towards resiliency, and we're always looking for ways to improve implementation of codes, adoption of codes. And one thing that we had been really focusing on as an agency and collaborating with our Code Officials Association of Virginia, the Virginia Building and Code Officials Association, or VBCOA, is you know, post-disaster building code enforcement. And we thought there was a gap there. You know, we started asking ourselves, you know, how prepared are we really if there's a wide-scale disaster that maybe impacts an entire jurisdiction or an entire region. And right now, you know, we have some local code officials, you know, throughout the state that have been through some post-disaster damage assessment training, but not everybody. And we don't really have a, you know, established network of those individuals that are well trained to be ready to respond if there was a major disaster, and you know, either in their locality where they need to respond, or maybe even statewide or another part of the state where they need some assistance. So you know, we started hearing about BRIC back in 2020, and you know, listening to some of the building code activities that were eligible for BRIC funding. And you know, as we thought through that, we're like, this really sounds a lot like what we're talking about, and a lot of the activities that we're wanting to do sound like they would fit right in with BRIC. You know, so during FY20, we did start working on our application with VBCOA, and you know, our project is to provide ICC's When Disaster Strikes Institute, and we hope to try to get that to every building inspector, fire inspector, every code enforcement professional throughout the state, and make it available for free and multiple offerings of it. We're looking at doing virtual classes to make it easier for some of the smaller shops to attend. And our goal would be to get as many trained individuals throughout the state as we can, so that if there is a disaster in the future, we'll have people ready to go. And that'll be kind of our first step in getting a good group of trained inspectors ready to respond in a disaster, and kind of the first step to building that disaster response network that we were interested in. So things like doing safety assessments, helping with plan reviews, inspections, whatever it might be, after a disaster in a locality. So going into the process, we really have very limited grant experience, especially myself. But Lisa is our ICC rep, and she was a really big help in getting us linked up with Debbie and her folks at VDEM. And while we had partnered with them on some other stuff and attend meetings together and work on some projects together, we really hadn't connected on this front of the grant world and working towards code implementation, and so that just, the light bulb just really went off. And as we started working through it, I'll have to admit I was a little intimidated by the process at first, hearing everything about the grants and not having that experience. We did have the benefit of Jimmy Moss with VBCOA having some grant experience and helping us with that application. But VDEM has been great throughout and really helped us a lot throughout the process, and made it really easy. And we're already thinking about what's our next project going to be after we finish up this one, if it goes forward and is awarded. We're looking at a couple things related to BSEGs, and are there some localities in Virginia where we might be able to partner with or help to provide some resources to increase BSEG scores and things along those lines. I know I'm probably going over my time, so I could stop there and see if we've got any other discussion or questions.
No, you're fine. And what you had mentioned the relationship between the state and also with an ICC chapter, and then also with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. So the chapter is VBCOA. Maybe you could let the folks in the audience know what that stands for.
Yeah, VBCOA is the Virginia Building and Code Officials Association, and that's our statewide chapter for code enforcement personnel. And we work real closely with them all the time, and they were a big partner in this application. They signed a resolution, and like I said, we were actually working before we learned about BRIC on trying to face some of these questions that we had and come up with a resolution. So this just really fell right in line and worked out well.
Yeah, of course. And that, that demonstrates that partnership, federal all the way down through the state, and then even down into the localities through the chapter, even though you're a state organization and you applied as a sub applicant, even though you're a state entity. Dale's going to parse that out a little bit more here in a couple seconds to talk about, because the state is pretty well recognized in terms of being the applicant, right? In its states, territories, tribes, and the District of Columbia. So it gets a little interesting, and I'm looking forward to Dale explaining his side and take on that applicant versus sub-applicant. But back to your when disaster strikes application, you and I talked a little bit earlier this week and last about the fact that the Code Council is updating the when disaster strikes program. FEMA has given us some really great materials over the last couple of years that we've participated in developing with them. So you're going to see a whole brand new update to the when disaster strikes as of November when we take it for a test drive. I'd love to have you join us for that and give us your feedback, and then make that what we can do to make it the best for your members and the folks across the country. So having said that, it's a good reminder that under BRIC, training, education, certification, accreditation, all of those things that fall under the the code administration piece are available. And Jeff's application, your application is a really great example to be able to share with folks. So we thank you for that. But I would be remiss if I did not say that partnership, when we talk about federal, state, and local, it's also effective because we've got our local GR reps like Lisa Berger, who you mentioned. And oh, by the way, Lisa is actually helping us to host this call in the background today too. She's a great help to me and to all of the folks in government relations. And we ask that all of you take advantage of your regional reps just the same way that Jeff did. So it's a partnership all the way through to get these kinds of things in front of the state and FEMA to get approved. So any closing comments from you, Jeff? Or?
No, I'll just say, don't hesitate if you have some questions, but you think you might have a project that would fit the BRIC program. Reach out to ICC if you're not sure who to talk to. They'll get you hooked up with the right people. And like I said, there's just about everything we do on a day-to-day basis is working towards implementation of, or more effective implementation of building codes and fire codes. So don't hesitate. They get you hooked up with the right people. It makes the process a lot easier, and we can do it. And any of you all could do it just as easy.
That was my favorite comment that you made earlier too, which was, if you're with the state or your locality, your state agency like yourself or locality, you can get this done no matter maybe how big it looks to you when you first get started. You can get through this, particularly with the partnerships with VDEM and others like the Code Council. So thank you for your good words today, and we'll catch up with you here again in a few minutes. That said, I'd like to welcome our next panelist, Dale Tomier from ISO Verisk. And again, Dale, I'll get your slides up here in a second here too. Dale is the Manager Community Hazard Mitigation for ISO. Folks, I think know Dale pretty well and certainly know of the building code effectiveness grading scale. But you're here to help us break that down a little bit more today, Dale, and talk about it in terms of how it comports with BRIC. So the stage is yours, sir, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Carl, and thanks everyone for joining, and thanks to the partners on the line. It's very fortunate that I get to work with all the people on this call. I know everyone pretty well, and we'll jump into the presentation. We thought what we would do is, knowing that not everyone on this call is a building code official, and a lot of people may not be as familiar with the BSEGS component as they might want to be. We thought on the first slide here in our set, we would just give you a little bit of a background real quickly on what BSEGS is and kind of where it came from and what it means. And then we have some information that is very BRIC specific. We were really super excited to be able to be part of BRIC because we feel like it helps us shine a spotlight on the good work being done by the building code departments in the U.S. We're not doing the protection that the building departments are doing. We're just shining a light on it, and so it's really great to see this. And we've had a lot of good interactions in last cycle and currently in this cycle with building departments that are really being able to leverage the work they're doing to help other constituents in their community. So what is BSEGS basically, right? BSEGS was primarily an insurance industry class and rating program. Originally started in the mid to late 1990s as a response to a number of natural disasters, and BSEGS was designed to look at resources and support that are made available to your local building code department and how well your local building code department utilizes those resources that they've been given. And so fast forward to today, virtually every jurisdiction in the U.S. has a BSEGS classification of one type or another. That's countrywide, and we routinely update these classifications as a company. So ISO or our parent company Verisk, our representatives come around to building code departments on a regular basis, and we collect information about what goes in, what's going on in the community. If we can go back one slide, what goes into a community's building code enforcement. And so it's important for the non-building code officials on the call to understand how BSEGS is assigned and kind of how you get your arms around it for a BRIC perspective. So BSEGS generates what are called classifications. That's a 1 to 10 number. It's a scale, 1 being better than a 10, and you get a dual set of numbers for every jurisdiction, 1 through 10. And so when you ask about your local building code department and you ask, hey, what's your BSEGS score, you're going to get 2 numbers from your code official. And either one of those numbers is applicable to BRIC, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But BSEGS is assigned at a community level. So it's whatever the smallest form of government is that provides building code enforcement protection is how BSEGS is assigned. So if you're a traditional city, town, or village, and you have your own building code department, then you'll have your own BSEGS classification. If you're a community that contracts with a private third-party provider, or you're covered by the county building code department, the classification of that provider or that county is transferred to your jurisdiction. So many times, if you're looking at doing a BRIC application, and you're trying to determine what your BSEG score is, and you're a small community, you may not have any recollection of ever having a BSEG survey because it may have been done by the county department, for instance, that provides protection to you. So that's how it's disseminated. But the good news is we're here to help with that, and we have set up a lot of resources for you. So now we'll go on to the next slide and just give you an understanding for those that are not building code officials on the call, kind of what goes into a BSEG classification, right? And so you'll notice that here on this list, BSEGs is more than just which building code do I have, right? The building code that you're using and amendments that are made to that building code are a critical element to BSEGs, but it's also the enforcement effort at the jurisdiction, right? As Camille said earlier, and I think very aptly, it's the attribute of the community, right? It's the attribute of the people that are applying for the funds that we're looking at. And BSEGs is really a hyper-local measurement of utilization of code enforcement resources and effectiveness of building code enforcement. So it's broken up into 3 sections, obviously code administration, the training, the staffing of the building code department, qualifications of the building department staff, their budgeting, their funding mechanisms, all go into the first section. How well your community executes plan review, the detail of their plan review and the staffing resources allocated to that, and the same for inspection, resource allocation for field inspection, inspection processes, and the like are all included. And all of that information is taken into consideration, and the classification is created, and it's again a 1 to 10 scale. So if you'll notice, we'll go on to the next slide. The qualification for BRIC review points is a BSEGs of 1 to 5. And the first reaction some folks will have is, well, what is, one, what does that mean? And 2, well, that must be really hard to get, right? I mean, 1 to 5 must be really like the top tier, hardest scores to get. So the chart you see in front of you is essentially a roll-up of all the graded jurisdictions in the country. And this is about maybe three months old, so it's relatively current information. Right now, of the graded building code departments in the US, 71% of them are within 1 to 5 already. So congratulations, good news, that hurdle is over for you. We just have to make sure that your grant applicants that are not necessarily your local unit of government, your sub-applicant that might be a water district or a school district, they know what your score is. That's really the big issue here. If your community has a BSEG score of 6 and you're just outside of that threshold and you want to know, how do I get back to a 5? I mean, that's where we come in. We will be very happy to help you with that. And I'll show you in another slide, how you get that assistance. We as a company are committed to assisting communities to improve their classifications, improve their scores. And we can provide a lot of help and a lot of information about that. So we'll go on to the next little slide here. And it talks about, this is one of the issues, right? And again, I think if you take nothing else away from the presentation beyond Camille's really good, excellent detailed presentation on BRIC, is applicant and sub-applicant are important, right? I think we've all said that. And that really is where BSEGs comes into play, because the BSEGs classification that is applicable to your project is the BSEG class that is applicable to the sub-applicant on the grant application. Now, let me be really clear. ISO is not making determinations on who is the sub-applicant or who the appropriate sub-applicant is. Those technical definitions need to go to your state. Your state hazard mitigation officer, and they will consult with others at FEMA to determine that if you're unclear, right? We do occasionally get those questions, and we just forward them to get a proper response. But sub-applicants are kind of broken into 3 different categories. And Carl, we mentioned about Jeff's project in which case the state is also the sub-applicant in his case. And according to the BRIC guidance, if the state is the sub-applicant, you use a state average BSEGS classification that we produce every year and publish on our website. This is on a public site available to everyone. And we have a link. There's a link in the technical guidance, and we have a link coming up where you can go and get, for instance, all right, what is the Virginia state average in Jeff's case? And you can get that information, and that is the BSEGS class that applies to the sub-applicant if the sub-applicant is a state agency. If the sub-applicant is a local unit of government, city, town, county, village, it's the BSEGS classification assigned to that unit of government. So if it's the town of Mapleville as the sub-applicant, then it's Mapleville's BSEGS classification that would apply. The first place to look for that information, if you're not already aware of it, is check with the local building code department in that jurisdiction. One, it's good to get to know those folks if you don't know them. And two, they'll have that information because we have sent that information to them over time. In the event they don't have it, that happens. In the event they don't have it, we have a email inbox set up, and we'll talk about that in a minute, where you can directly inquire, and we will assist you with that. The more complex version that we get involved in is when the sub-applicant is a quasi-governmental entity or some other entity, water district, drainage district, school districts. In many cases, it's the BSEGS classification applicable to the physical location of that project. A water district may cover parts of 3 counties, but the project is a spillway rebuild at a certain location. So at that point, we have to kind of ask some questions, and we'll be happy to help with this as well. But you need to ask yourself this question: if I had to get a building permit to build something on this site, who would have jurisdiction? And when you answer that question, that's the entity that their BSEGS classification is the appropriate one to use. And so it's not always just a really direct answer, right? There is a little bit of digging involved sometimes and some confusion. So we'll go on to the next slide. We'll show you how we can help, right? So I need some help with this, right? So 2 things ISO is committed to doing with BRIC, and we're really excited to be able to do this. We'll assist the sub-applicant with determination of the appropriate class. If you're a sub-applicant and you don't know what the BSEGS class should be, you can reach out to us directly. We set up an email inbox, bsegsinfo@veris.com. That's also in the FEMA tech guidance. And just let us know, I represent X school district. We're applying for a BRIC grant. This is our address. We're in this town. Do you know what our BSEGS class is? We can't give the BSEGS classifications out just publicly because of the proprietary nature of some of their uses, but we do give the information to sub-applicants and to the jurisdictions in which they're located. So it is certainly able to be given to you for your application. In the case that you have a building code department that falls outside that 1 to 5, and we have time before the state applications are due, we will work with those code officials, go line by line, and try to assist them in understanding, all right, where's some yardage we can pick up really quickly to improve your classification and improve your building code department, and get you in the running for BRIC. And we've done this. We did this last cycle with a number of jurisdictions that were just over that cusp. Nothing worse than being at a 6 and a 5 is the goal. We were able to help those jurisdictions in many cases, and I think Carl will probably ask me about this, and he has before. What can we do? Well, depends on the jurisdiction and depends on where you are, but there are a number of areas where communities can pick up points that do not require a massive overhaul of the building code department, and we're committed to helping with that. Also, this is the website on this slide about where you can go to get the state averages. That's also in the technical guidance on the FEMA document. The facts and figures. you can get a national average and you can get a state-by-state average there. And I know my email address will be included at the end of this, but also that bsegsinfo@veris.com. If you just have a general question, you can also send it to that inbox. It will get answered immediately, and we will be very happy to help out. And Carl, I think I'm going to leave us time for some Q&A.
Nope, that is it, and I really appreciate you doing that. Dale, I don't know that your email address was up there, so we can, if you want to give it out here, you're certainly welcome to, or we can put it with the materials when we post them. But if you want to give that out directly, please feel free.
Sure, it's dale.tomyor@veris.com.
There you go. So that's the way to get in touch with Dale. We'll also, as a reminder, have all these materials posted on our website, the BRIC microsite. It's www.iccsafe.org/BRIC. And I want to thank all of our folks that participated in the panel today. Maybe you could turn on your cameras here for a few minutes, and we'll kind of wrap up here. But you can see on the screen that we've got these other pieces on here on certification, training, going virtual, building department accreditation, and consulting services for code adoption. That'll all be available to you on this presentation. Again, that'll be posted on that website on the top, iccsafe.org/BRIC. And then my contact information is on there as well. If we need to get with any of the panelists here today, I can get right to them, and would be happy to answer any questions directly. So I guess, Dale, on the time that we have remaining here today, maybe you can speak to, because I do like to pressure you on these things every once in a while, but we talk a lot about the training, education, certification, accreditation piece, and what is some of the direct effects there on BSEGs? And I will caveat that by saying that I know every situation is different, but are those examples of some of those things that you can do to get some pretty good pickups in the time that's remaining before the end of the cycle this time?
Yeah, so if you had to say, give me the short list of points that move the needle quickly, right, on a classification, well, obviously the training of your staff is probably the single biggest one. Obtaining additional training in the intervening review period for BSEGs will increase scores. Obtaining extra certification will have a positive impact on classifications. Also, this works out most of the time. Having a slightly more accurate review of record keeping systems in a community is incredibly important, and it will drive classifications in a positive way as well. There's surprisingly some very simple, even some very simple policy items of, basically memorializing current practice in a written policy, right? Doesn't change a thing other than it is a documented policy at that point. Maybe credit could be achieved. And it's really endless. I mean, every jurisdiction really is slightly different. Even in states with a lot of mandates, you will see a lot of local variation.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And, we're all available for follow-up questions on this too. Camille, I wanted to come back to you. I know you started kind of so long ago, but you've been really diligent about answering these Q&A items in the background. So having heard what you heard on this one, any closing comments from you at all, particularly maybe with your, I will say that the National Emergency Management Association, NEMA, and IEM have been helpful to make sure that our state hazard mitigation officer, SHMO counterparts from across the country were aware of this today. And I know you're passionate about that group, having worn that hat previously, as well as Debbie. So maybe some closing comments for you, anything for the SHMOs at all, or anything else you'd like to say?
Hello, as a former SHMO, I say hello to all of you, and I will be at the NEMA and the IAM conferences over the next 2 weeks. And I hope to connect with some of you there in Cleveland and Grand Rapids. Travel is back. Closing comments, though, one thing I've tried to post in the chat is really, let me say this first. If you are all interested in BRIC, our application period is open and states have deadlines coming up because they have their role to do as the applicant. please get in contact if you're from a local government with your state hazard mitigation officer as soon as possible to understand their priorities and their application deadlines. I've also posted in the chat, if you're interested in building code project types, I've seen questions about, can we apply for this? Can we apply for that? We outline, including you can apply for funding in the allocations to improve your BSEG score. So I would really suggest getting a copy of that 4-page, I open it up, it's 4 pages long, guidance, as well as I put a link for our technical criteria for our competition. It really spells out the building code requirements for those 20 or 10 points and the BSEG requirements for those 20 points, and gives a lot of the information that Dale just shared, including where you can go get if you need a survey. We're hoping you'll do that as soon as possible so you can get that taken care of before the application deadline.
Well, I look forward, thank you for that, and I look forward to seeing you both at NEMA and IEM, and want to thank them publicly for scheduling their conferences back to each other to spend 2 weeks on the road, but at least we'll be doing that together, Camille. I'll see you there. Debbie and Jeff, thank you so much. Any closing comments from the both of you? I mean, I really appreciate you sharing the relationship and the way that this has worked, and sharing an example of what sounds to be like it's going to be a successful award in your application. So any closing comments from VDEM or DHCD?
I'll just say one thing. I just wanted to say reach out to the SHMOs, and I actually learned what a SHMO is going through this process. Didn't even know what that was before. And the local building departments, fire departments, code enforcement personnel doing the building code activities. You know, if you aren't already talking, link up. Just through this process, us have developed a close relationship with VDEM. And that's actually is helping us on some other fronts, collaborate on other stuff, knowing that we're working on a lot of the same stuff that we weren't communicating on before. So it's even had other benefits outside of the BRIC grant. So just wanted to encourage you all to do that.
It's really great. Well, thank you so much for everybody's contributions today. Again, another shout out to my colleague, Lisa Berger, for helping out with this in the background and doing a great job for us there. And on behalf of the entire membership and staff of the International Code Council, thank you, and to the folks that have stepped up today to attend this in person. Also, it's going to be available again, iccsafe.org/BRIC, and we'll leave it there for today. Everybody be safe, and thank you for your time. And if we could just ask our panelists to stay on for a couple minutes. Lisa, if you could put us back into that private session, that would be great, and we'll do some wrap up with them.